My next guest is Brian Dalton. Brian has taught for over 24 years and raced in over 20 triathlons. He is the author of Teach for Endurance, Surviving the Swim, Bike, and Run in Today's Classroom. He is also the Teach for Endurance podcast host, a keynote motivational speaker, consultant, helper of teachers and students in navigating educational waters. Brian uses his endurance racing experiences, lessons learned while training, as well as his unique sense of humor to correlate endurance racing to the greatest endurance challenge of all, the academic school year. Brian lives in Rochester Hills, Michigan. Welcome to the podcast, Brian.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So this podcast focuses a lot on stories of resilience and of teachers and educators who have been in the trenches sometime in their life. Can you tell me about a story about when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out?
Absolutely. I think probably the deepest trench I've ever found myself in was in second grade. Well, from second grade to eighth grade. In second grade, I was told by my mom that she was going to pass away from Hodgkin's disease, which is probably not the greatest thing to tell someone in second grade, but at the time that was the thing, I guess, to do. And so from second grade to eighth grade, I kind of lived with that notion. And since my dad wasn't there, I'm the one taking care of her at home. I'm the one, rubbing her back after chemo. I'm the one that's dealing with all this. And those are very formidable years. So the fact that, even when she passed away at May 18th of my eighth grade year, I don't think the trenches get much more deep than that. And the fact that I was able to come out the other side and, I think have a fairly successful life, it taught me a lot at a very, very young age.
Yeah, you were telling me in the pre-chat about, just having gone through that as a youngster has helped you all the more as an adult and just any trials and tribulations that you've come across. And I think that's helped you as well become an endurance athlete. So tell me about the mental game that you have learned when you're an endurance athlete. How does that tie over to teaching? And what have you learned from becoming a triathlete that helps your teaching? I think you became a teacher first, right? And then
Absolutely, yeah. Athlete. Absolutely. I think, well, I had mentioned to you before, whether it's teaching, whether it's racing, whether it's being a dad, whatever I do, for the most part, I try to, plan my work my plan. And I would not go into a swim and a triathlon without having an idea of what I would do when the poop hits the fan. If I get tired, if someone knocks my goggles off, if for whatever happens, I'm always have an escape route. Same goes for the bike, same goes for the run. And my job, or anybody's job for that matter, but as a teacher, plans A, B, and C often are never going to work. And it's a good thing I got all the way up to Z in the alphabet, because, the more you have as your backup plan when things don't go the way you want, the better your chances are at some sense of success. So, unfortunately, I noted before, too many teachers, they leave college, unfortunately, with, I don't think, is enough information on what it really is. I mean, there's only so much a book can tell you. And when they're thrown into those educational waters as a youngster by themselves, really, I mean, they say sometimes you get mentors, but really in the end, you're by yourself. I think it's so overwhelming, and they don't really have that escape route in mind, or the ability to quite navigate how difficult it can really be. So plan some more for every contingency I can think of. And usually things work out okay.
Yeah. So what motivated you to start using your story as an endurance athlete to help teachers?
Well, as you know, training is, well, at least for me, it is a very solitary experience. So I don't train with anybody. So I have a lot of time on my hands, whether it's a 4-hour bike or it's a 3-hour swim or whatever. And really my book, all the ideas started coming to me in all my swim work or swim trainings. And I couldn't believe all the things that I do while I'm training and racing crossed over into not only my teaching life, but just life in general.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the idea started taking shape. And then what motivated me to kind of put it to action into a book and so forth was just seeing the data, the numbers, people leaving teaching in epic numbers and people not going into the profession in epic numbers, when in actuality, I mean, in my very humble opinion, it's probably one of the most important jobs that are out there. You know, you're cultivating, you know, our future.
Yeah.
And with no one going into it, I mean, it was, you know, it was kind of a frightening epiphany. It was like, my Lord, who's going to be, you know, who are these kids going to have?
Yeah.
So that kind of prompted me to say, all right, well, instead of keeping all these things in my head, you know, I'll share what I know and share what I can and see if I can, you know, find a way to put some smiles back on people's faces and help them through, you know, those times when they're like, why am I doing this? Or is this for me? Or should I quit? Whatever. So that's kind of why.
Were you working a long time on your book before it got published? Was this like an ongoing process over several years?
No, actually, I was lucky in that sense. I'd say it was probably from start to finish, maybe a year and a half, year
Okay.
and three. You know, when I'd come home from the pool, if I had an idea, I'd write it down. And so most of the stuff was written in rough format. And then I just got lucky. I mean, I think I mailed 3 publishers and two in New York and 1 in Massachusetts. And then the one in Massachusetts was all for it and was off to the races.
Mm-hmm. Well, you told me that you started racing Ironmans 8 years ago, and your first race was Alcatraz. So you kind of went for the the really tough race first. So,
Mm-hmm.
want to tell me about how you managed to train for that race, and how you managed to just jump right into the full Ironman, and while you're working as a teacher full time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a few things with it. I'm sure psychologists would have a field day with it, but my guess is that I learned early on, as we talked about earlier, that every day is not guaranteed and it can be taken away like that. So I really didn't see the need in prepping myself for something that I really wanted to do. And if Alcatraz is what I wanted to do, then I was going to do it. And I wasn't going to pay my dues, I guess, so to speak, and try to figure things out prior. I just did it. As far as training goes, the best thing I can tell anyone for training is the best thing that I can tell them for life.
Mm-hmm.
Go back to Theodore Roosevelt, and he said, comparison is the thief of joy. Do not look at other people's workouts. Do not try to keep up with the hours that pros are doing or that people that, you know, have different situations. Everyone has a different situation. If you got 3 kids and a full-time job, you are not going to be able to train like the workouts you see online. You're just not. So you do what works for you. I told you, unless you're planning on winning, which I'm not, that's never been the goal. You don't have to get crazy. I've never ran 26 miles in my life, except in my races.
Yeah.
I've never even run half of that. 11 miles is the longest run I've ever done in a training session. I've never biked 112 miles in one sitting ever. I think my longest bike ride for an Ironman in a training session was like 75 miles. That's it. I mean, it's still a long way, but it's not 112. Swimming, I will put in the extra. I mean, swimming, I mentioned to you when we talked before, I've done 3-mile swims before, where in essence, an Ironman swim is 2.4 miles.
Mm-hmm.
But it's good to do that because at Alcatraz, as you said, the swim at Alcatraz is only supposed to be about, I think, 1.8 miles if you do it right, but you can end up swimming a long way if you let the current push you towards the Golden Gate Bridge. So you better be able to swim more than 1.8 miles.
So tell me a little bit about what you need to be prepared for that swim, because you said somebody in your heat ended up having a cardiac arrest, and there's a bunch of things that can go wrong during the swim more than the other 2 sports. So how many hours a week do you usually train for that swim? And what do you do if you encounter a situation where you feel like you can't go on during the swim?
Well, that one, I don't have my numbers on that one, but I guarantee you that I never get in the pool more than twice a week, especially having 4 kids and teaching and so forth. So I've never had more than 2 swim workouts, and I could bet that most of them were no longer than an hour and a half. what I did that was probably the best bang for my buck is I found this awesome gentleman in San Francisco, Diego. He has this little old tinker boat, and you pay him $100 and he will take you out to the prison, and he says, okay, jump off. And he jump off in the water and he takes off. And he said, and you go and you swim to his boat. And that was probably the best thing I did because I knew what I was getting into. I learned that my goggles were going to freeze to my face. I learned that I wasn't going to be able to breathe right for about 5 minutes. I learned that it's really, really, really cold. I learned that the current is really, really strong. So that morning, because people's, in these races, when you hear of tragic things happening, most people are nervous about the swim. Yeah. Why? Because, well, we sink. we're not made for water. So your heart rate's already up. It's early in the morning, and all those things going on in your body at once. It doesn't take a whole lot for things to go chaotic. So by knowing what I was heading into that race morning, at least for the swim, I was really confident that I knew what it was going to feel like jumping in, and I knew exactly what I was going to be dealing with, and my game plan for swimming. And, because I swam around the prison, I swam to wherever he took his boat. I knew how the current was working. I learned about the potato patch, which is where the current's going about 3 different directions. And if you're not watching it, you're not going to get anywhere. So it's all kinds of little things that I didn't have to worry about race morning.
Yeah, well, you took that time to prepare yourself in those waters, and not everybody does.
Plan your work your plan. I told you.
Yeah. So you told me a little bit about like how you're kind of on autopilot once you're kind of in the marathon part of the race, and what kind of keeps you from just kind of pooping out and just giving up at that last little bit, because I attempted a full marathon, and I would say I pooped out at the end and didn't finish the whole. I've done a 25K, a heavy half. That's not as far as I've gone, and I'd like to reattempt the marathon. But how do it's a mental game more than anything, right?
Everyone's different. It's something intrinsic. I don't quit at pretty much anything. And I'm sure it goes, again, if we're going to get psychological, I'm sure it goes back to my mom. I saw what she endured. Yeah. She shouldn't have made it for 6 years. Yeah. My assumption is that she fought longer than she probably should have to be around me. Mm-hmm. So the fact of what she endured, I kind of try to instill that in my own kids. You just don't quit. If you quit, life's going to leave footmarks up your back. Yeah. And that's just not how I do things. So I wish there was a more, step-by-step process, but there really isn't. It's just who I am. I just kind of don't do it. I don't give up.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your second book. You told me that you have a second book in the work, and how is that different from your first book? And what is the message that book is talking about for educators? And when
okay. Well, it's in the end, everything I do, whether it's the podcast, speaking, consulting, book, whatever, is supposed to help teachers. Mm-hmm. This one is different in the fact it's supposed to help. It's helpful for teachers, but it's something that I think it's forgotten a lot. So the working title is Shut Up and Listen. Mm-hmm. And really it's just based on, I begin all my classes when we're in school and things were somewhat normal with a huddle. And in the huddle, me and my teenagers talk about things that probably many people don't talk about in a classroom, whether it's, what they're going through, their fears, things they're proud of. I mean, just all kinds of things. So these huddles always have a theme. And, I would take down their thoughts, their responses. I would get their feedback and what they were feeling. It's basically almost like a data collection. Mm-hmm. And then I started putting things together in my head about, we are really, really good at telling kids what to do. I don't think a lot of times we're really good at really listening to what they're trying to tell us. And I think we need to hear them more than ever right now, because they have so many. You and I growing up, it was hard enough. We had, magazines, we had movies, we had, newspaper, whatever. Cable TV, but you and I didn't have to deal with the onslaught of social media and and just the constant barrage of kind of telling kids, you know, the way to be, or this is beautiful, or that's not beautiful, and that's tough. And a lot of them don't know how to navigate those waters. And that's just one example. I mean, another thing that's different, most of my kids, I think the divorce rate now is 50%, 1 and 2.
Yeah.
So a lot of my kids are dealing with multiple families. Some are dealing with just one parent. A lot of stuff that would tell you a lot when Johnny or Jill doesn't really care about learning about the telltale heart one day. Well, maybe that's not exactly on the top of their list. You know what I mean? So that's this kind of the whole thing is. And then I again have workouts just like in my first book for a teacher to kind of, you know, whatever the main theme of that particular chapter is in that huddle was of what, you know, you can do to kind of help not only yourself, but the students and whatever it is that, you know, the difficulty that they're going through. So it's been an eye opener for me. Like I said, I'm in about 13 chapters in. I'm not rushing it. I still got ways to go. I got a lot more I want to talk to my kids about. I just want to wait to get back to school.
Yeah.
To do it.
So a lot of that book is based on just experience that you have in your school with your students and
well, let's
building relationships.
Yep. Here's a good example. It was tremendous. You and I have had our Kennedy moments. You know, 9/11. We lived through that. I'll never forget that. For me, the space shuttle Challenger. I remember being in science class and that. So you and I have experienced that. A lot of our kids, at least my kids, had their first Kennedy moment this year, and I didn't hear anyone talking about it to them, which was Kobe Bryant. That was scary to them. A lot of them lost a hero. A lot of them lost. You know, they feel they know these people. So we talked about that, you know, what's going on in your head, and again, that's the whole concept. I listened to what they had to say, and then we tried to make sense of it. And that's kind of what the book is. I mean, you can try to plow your way through. I think there's a chapter in my first book that, what did I call it? I forget. It's about the bike. It's about keeping things steady.
Yeah.
Okay. You can try to swim against the current or bike uphill all you want, but gravity in essence is always going to win because gravity is tough. So if my kids are suffering, for example, and they're dealing with a tragic loss, and they're sad about someone passing away like that, my lesson plan is not at the top of their priority list, nor should it be. And if they need to talk, want to talk, so forth, then that's my job for that day. And I have no problem doing that. And that's kind of where that book, you know, has been taken me. And it's been, like I said, it's a learning process, but it's also eye-opening. So I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I think more and more teachers are realizing that, you know, the social emotional needs of our students what should come first, right? A lot of us are thinking we have curriculum we need to cover, but you know, more and more in the past couple of years, I think our eyes have been open to building those relationships first and finding out, you know, they're acting out a lot of the time in our class because something happened at home or prior to coming into our classroom. It has nothing to do with what we're teaching.
Absolutely. And that's a great connection. And that's, you know, that's always been my forefront is if you don't have relationships, you're not getting anywhere anyway. You'll have a few kids that'll play the game and get their A's and B's, but overall, if they don't think, especially the age I teach, if they don't think that you have their best interests at heart, you've lost that battle. Mm-hmm. Same thing with racing. You either better have a good symbiotic relationship with the water or you're going down. You better know what you're doing on your bike going down a hill at 35 miles an hour or you're going down. And all of that's about relationships. Yeah. You got to respect the environment that you're in and work with it, not fight it.
Yeah, no, I really like that quote, respect the environment that you're in, because, you know, it could be the classroom, it could be teaching our students via our online platform if we're doing some type of remote teaching, or just on that run the run that you're in. I always hear, run the mile that you're in, right?
Yeah.
Don't think about, you still have 13 miles to go, right?
Well, I don't know if it was in our pre-talk or if it was someone else that I was talking to, but I saw an interview with a Navy SEAL instructor, and those that succeed in Hell Week and becoming a Navy SEAL, the best are the ones that go 1 minute at a time, one step at a time. Do not think about what's coming up later in the day, because you're not going to make it. What's the next obstacle? What's the next routine? That's what I say with the run. If I'm at mile 8, if I keep thinking, my God, I got 18 miles to go, I am going to implode. But if I keep moving forward one step at a time, and I know every mile I have an aid station and I get that lovely Gatorade and I get those cool little gummy chews and whatnot, it's just one little step at a time, and it all seems to work out better that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great, thing to keep in mind, right? Speaking of races, once things kind of move a little bit back to normal as they can get, like in Colorado, I'm going to do, like I told you, a 8-mile trail race, and there's a 10K half marathon at the beginning of September that they've approved, and they've set their COVID regulations for and everything, and capped the number of participants. But do you have any races that you're kind of thinking about on the horizon, maybe in early 2021, that you're maybe training a little bit for, or at least keeping some type of level of fitness for those?
There's 3 in my mind. Number 1 is I want to do Alcatraz again. That's number 1. I told you in talking I'd love to do the Boulder Ironman. And then I'll go back any day in time to Lake Placid. I've done that one twice, and that's such a magical town. It's a tough race. Those hills on the bike will make you cry, but it's just gorgeous. I love it out there. So those are probably the 3 that, I'd love to say Kona, but again, I don't see that happening anytime soon. So I'll stick, more realistically would be those 3.
And isn't Kona, out of all those, the most treacherous?
It depends. Everyone has their own opinion. I think I've already probably done one of the more dangerous swims. So if I can handle that swim, I'm pretty sure Kona's I could handle. A lot of the pros say Lake Placid's bike is the toughest. It doesn't necessarily have the headwinds that Kona would have, but when you're going through the Adirondack Mountains, there's some climbers in there that will absolutely crush you. And you got to do them twice.
Yeah.
So, and the run is no joke either. There's some hills on the run out there that, when your legs are already tough. So it's a matter of opinion, but Placid's bike is tough.
And you talked to me a little bit about, you have those pros on the course, right? But you're not trying to win. So you try not to get intimidated by some of those people that are racing. No. Are you kind of that middle of the pack, back of the pack racer? How are you?
I'd say middle, and it depends on what it is. I mean, I taught myself to swim, but surprisingly, somehow I've become a pretty good swimmer.
Yeah. I
hate the bike. I absolutely despise the bike and everything about it. So I would say that, I probably, if I'm going to get lapped or crushed on something, that's going to be somewhere on the bike.
Yeah.
And in the run, I don't even care. Like I said, run's autopilot. I don't even know who's around me on the run. Like I said, I'm just doing my thing. I'd say I'm usually middle to later quarter, 3/4 in. But I never had a DNF.
Yeah, well, that's great.
Nothing stopped me yet, and I've had plenty of opportunity to bow out. Trust me. So,
well, tell me a little bit about what you would say to teachers now as we prepare to start the 2021 school year, and how it's looking different than any other year any of us have ever taught. What would you say to those teachers who are just really worried about starting, and whether it's the worry about contracting COVID, or worry about how they're going to teach remotely, or just worry about just protocols that their districts put in place? What would you say to those teachers if they feel like they can't make it through the school year at some point?
That's a heavy question with a lot. In a nutshell, I'd start with don't have any preconceived notions, because the more you think about what reality is going to be, the less it's going to match your expectations. And that's more often than not when people get bummed out. So, let go of all your expectations, because Lord knows it's going to be very, very different this year. The other thing, worrying, it's easier said than done. But I can speak from life perspective, I think I've been through quite a bit, and I can speak to racing perspective. Exactly what good is worrying going to get you? It's either going to happen or it's not.
Yeah.
All you're doing by worrying is creating anxieties of something that may or may not happen anyway.
Yeah.
But what are you doing with the worrying? You're losing out on the beauty of your present moment.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I wish I had something more concrete for that, but the bottom line is, if it's not doing you any benefit, then what's the point?
Yeah.
So I would let them know that. And then as far as how to, get through the year, I think one thing is you and I already talked about it. It's don't look too far into the future.
Yeah.
One day at a time. Baby steps, one day at a time, one class at a time, one Zoom meeting at a time, whatever that case may be. Because if you're looking at, oh my gosh, it's September 3rd and I'm going to be doing this until October 20th, whatever.
Yeah.
You're already putting weight on your shoulders that does not need to be there.
Yeah.
Did you make it through first hour?
Mm-hmm.
If you did, good job. Pat yourself on. Let's keep moving. But the other thing that some people may not want to hear, you can only do did you know that it's physiologically and psychologically impossible to do well at something that you aren't intrinsically motivated to do?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I could make you have to learn how to play the guitar, but if you have absolutely no interest in it whatsoever, you might pick up a couple chords here and there, but you're never going to become really, really good at it.
Mm-hmm.
My point is, sometimes people need to have a hard discussion with themselves and be honest with themselves. And if they don't think they can do it, if their heart's not into it, then maybe you shouldn't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's at reality and what you want are two totally different things. If your reality is that you're scared to go to school for health reasons, or maybe your heart's not in it anymore or whatnot, then maybe that's a discussion you need to have with yourself. And maybe that's the answer you're afraid to say out loud, but needs to be said. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in the end, you're doing yourself a favor and those around you, because if you're doing something that you're not really, feeling inside, you're not at your happiest, you're not at your most positive, you're not getting the most out of life that you should. So that's a hard discussion to have with yourself, but sometimes I think some people need to have that one.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of educators who, they feel like they're in the trenches. They don't re-examine the situation, right? They kind of feel like it's everybody else's fault, but it's something that they need to re-examine about themselves, about, are they still passionate?
Yes.
Or is it going to take a change of scenery, right?
Yeah.
Going to a different district, or teaching at a different level, or maybe using their experience in education to take on a new role.
Absolutely.
As a consultant.
Well, and that ties in well. I know one of my podcast episodes was no return to syndication.
Yeah.
Whether they mean to or not, I think some people live life like we're a sitcom and we get some like reboot for reruns, and that's not the case. This is your shot.
Yeah.
If you don't want to race, don't race. If you love teaching, then teach. If you don't like teaching anymore, don't teach. It's really not that difficult.
Yeah.
Sometimes we make rocket science out of things that are not very difficult. But the bottom line is, you get one crack at this.
Yeah.
That's why when you asked me earlier, why would you start with Alcatraz? Well, why not? I don't want to wait. So, that's important to remember. Don't put off things that need to be done, and because you're never guaranteed you're going to get that shot anyway. Mm-hmm. So that's just my 2.5 cents.
No, I think those are good things to keep in mind. Well, out of everything we talked about today on the podcast, what's one thing in particular you'd like listeners to remember?
Oh, you had some tough questions for me. I say, there's enough platitudes in the world, so I'm not going to give you a platitude. I'm going to say what I said earlier, that whatever it takes for you in your own situation to keep moving forward, then you better do it, because life does not care. Life is not fair, and it never has been. So unless you want tread marks up your back, you keep moving forward, crawling forward, walking, running, swimming, biking, teaching. I don't care what it is, but that is your only option.
Yeah.
Is to push forward, because what's the alternative?
Yeah.
Nothing good. So, that would be kind of what I would say I'd want them to remember. And it's not even a platitude. I'm just telling them, keep your butt moving.
Yeah. One step at a time. No, that's
Yes,
great.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I thank you so much for being on the Out of the Trenches podcast. Where can people find you online?
My website is teachforendurance.net. My Twitter is Teach for Endurance. My Instagram is Teach for Endurance. And on my website, there's an email that's Teach for Endurance. So you can find me pretty easily at Teach for Endurance.
Okay, well, thank you so much. It was great chatting with you today.
I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.